Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about doing pool service when the weather is colder, the water is colder, and some things to look out for, and of course some gear that you would probably want to have to protect yourself from the cold water. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. So in my area of Southern California, it gets relatively cold here in the winter time. I would say there's probably a dozen mornings where it's in the 40s or below 40s, maybe even in the 30s, so fairly cold here. One of the things that you'll notice when you're doing pool service, maybe this is your first season, and it might get colder in your area, of course, if you're in Texas or areas like that. I think the only area where it stays pretty warm all year is Florida, so everyone loves being over there. But here in my area, it does get pretty chilly in the morning, and one thing that happens when you put your hands in the pool and then touch your pole is that they really feel like they're freezing. Your hands may turn numb, and they're definitely going to get pretty raw out there, and you'll notice that you're going to have chapped hands, and it's not a good feeling, and it's not a good thing, I don't think, for your body to be doing this year in and year out. So one thing that I highly recommend is wearing some kind of protective glove that will protect your hands from the cold water. I found that the best gloves for me are the Atlas gloves, and I'll give you the product number. They can find them on Amazon. Sometimes your supplier has them in stock also at the counter. They're called Atlas Glove WG772, and then L stands for large, so WG772L for the large size. I recommend the large size because then you can wear a pair of cotton gloves underneath, and you can still wear these on top. Now they're 26 inches long, so they go all the way up to your elbow, which means you can reach into skimmers with no problem. You can even use these gloves while you're cleaning the pool, not just for reaching in the skimmer. So I leave them on while I'm using my pole to clean the pool. They're fairly good. You can actually sometimes open a gate lock with them, like a combo lock. Sometimes you have to take them off for that. And they're pretty resistant to getting punctured. I would get 2 pairs. That way you have one in case you get a hole in it. But they do puncture, from stuff in the skimmer when you're reaching in there. Something may poke a hole through it, and they do wear out over time also. But they'll keep your hands really warm, especially if you wear a pair of cotton gloves underneath. And then when you take them off while you're driving, I put them on my dashboard with the heater on to warm them up. And so for the first 4 or 5 stops, I'm wearing these gloves out there because it's pretty freezing when you're touching your pole, reaching in the skimmers. And the feeling of having your hands numb all the time is just not a good feeling. And so definitely I recommend the Atlas gloves, the WG772, and you can find them on Amazon. They're like $20 or less than $20, and I would buy a couple pairs of these. And again, I mentioned you may want to wear some thin cotton gloves underneath it because they're not 100% resistant to the temperature because they have flexibility, and that's why I like them too, because you can move your hands around and flex them. They're not really stiff, but for that reason, they're not super protective to your hands over time. So if your hands are exposed to the cold with the Atlas gloves on for 5 or 6 minutes, you're going to start feeling it go through the glove and your hands may start to get cold. And so a way around that is just to get a really thin pair of cotton gloves and put them on your hands, and then put the Atlas gloves on top of that. So we do pool service all year round in my area. We don't close our pools. Now, of course, the question arises, especially in parts of Texas that were hit by a deep freeze maybe 2 years in a row now. Should you close your pool? And I think that is a question for the area-specific pool company that works in that area. And you definitely want to have a pool company close your pool for you. They'll clear the lines, they'll drain down the equipment, they'll detach the equipment if they need to, and they're the experts on doing this. You can do it yourself, of course, if you've done it before, but there are a lot of steps involved in closing off a pool. Now, if you don't close your pool off, then you may want to invest in a generator, because if you're in an area where it does get cold, like Texas, where it had that deep freeze almost 2 years in a row now, one of the things that is the problem there is not the fact that you can't keep the pool open. You can, because the pool can be running, and that's the only way to keep it open, having the water circulating in the pipes and the filter and the pump going back and making sure the water doesn't freeze. But what happens when you have a freeze type situation or a deep freeze and the weather's really cold? The power could go out, and if the power goes out for 4 to 5 hours, your pool equipment is probably going to start to freeze. The pipes are going to freeze, and this is the danger in those areas where you get freezing temperatures. If you do lose power, then you can compromise your equipment and even the plumbing underground in some cases. Usually they don't crack. They just get plugged up with ice, and then it takes a few days for it to thaw out. But as far as the equipment, you can have your filter crack. Of course, you're going to have your pump compromised. So that's the danger, and the heater, of course. So that's the danger of keeping your pool open in an area where you may get freezing temperatures. If you do lose power and the water does freeze and the water in the pipes freeze, the pump won't come back on, then you have a problem there. And the worst case scenario, you have to get new equipment. And the worst case scenario, you might have a pipe break underground, which doesn't happen very often. It's usually the pipes above the ground. The pipes on the ground are kind of insulated, but the water will freeze in there. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you're on the borderline of should you close your pool or not, and you decide to keep it open, you'll just keep your pump running 24/7 to make sure the water circulates. I would really highly recommend a backup generator that you can put your pool equipment on, so that if you do have a power failure, your pool equipment is still going to be running off of the generator. But I would definitely check with a local pool company on what your options are. If you're new to the area, check with your neighbors of what they do with their pool in the wintertime. And in most cases, if you do get areas of freezing temperature, closing the pool is the most logical thing to do to protect the equipment. And calling in a professional that closes pools is your best bet in that case. But we don't have that luxury here in my area. We do, however, get some nights where the temperature is freezing in the 30s, sometimes even less than 30 in the 20s. This has happened only like once or twice ever since I've been in my area here. All the plants start to die in the backyard when it gets like below 30. But usually it gets only into the 30s. And most pools, if you have a variable speed pump, will have what they call freeze protect, or they'll have freeze mode, something like that of that nature. So the variable speed pump or automated system will have a temperature sensor that senses the air temperature. And once it gets to a freezing temperature, it'll kick that pump on. A lot of times it's going to happen around midnight to 4 in the morning. And you may get a customer calling you saying, hey, my pool pump came on, at midnight, and it came on again the next night. And that's because it's entering freeze protect mode and is running. Now, the chances of your pipes freezing in 30-degree weather is pretty slim, but it does have a setting. I think the lowest you can lower it is like 34 degrees, maybe 33 degrees. I think 34 is the lowest setting you can have. So anything below that is going to come on. Some are set at like 37 degrees. Needless to say, when the temperature drops in the 30s, the chance of your variable speed pump coming on or your automated system kicking on the pump rise greatly. So let the customers know that, hey, your pump may come on because it has a freeze protect mode. You can modulate the RPMs in a lot of cases with most automated systems and most pool pumps. So what I like to do with the freeze protect mode on most of the pumps I have in my route, I'll set the freeze mode RPMs to about 1800. And that way it's not going to wake up the customer if the equipment's close to the house. And if there's a water feature like a spillway, you're not going to really hear it too much at 1800 RPMs. And so that's kind of how I deal with the freeze protect in my area, because it doesn't get super cold. Now, of course, if you're in an area where it does get into the 20s, you may want that pump to come on at a higher RPM. But for my area of Southern California, 1800 RPMs is perfectly fine to keep the water circulating and moving and not disturb the customer. One thing you can do also in the wintertime, if it is a long period of time where you're going to have cold weather, let's say for a week or two it's going to be in the 30s, you can actually set the pool timer to run from 10 p.m. to 8 or 10 in the morning, and that will supersede in most cases the freeze protect mode. It'll just be running all through the night, through the coldest period of the night, and then turn off during the day. I don't recommend running your pool pump at night for any other situation, but if it's going to come on every night and disturb the customer, you can just set it to come on anyway. Just let them know, hey, for the next 3 weeks, your pool's going to be set to run from 10 p.m. till 10 a.m. in the morning because of the cold weather, and I want to make sure that it's circulating at the coldest point of the night. Then that's perfectly fine. But in most cases, it'll come on 1 or 2 nights during the week, and that's about it. I've only had to do that on 2 occasions here where we had really cold weather and the customers didn't like the pump coming on unexpectedly. So once I set it for the timer, they knew it was going to come on and they weren't worried about it. I know some people are kind of weird about that. They get really paranoid when the pump comes on at midnight or 1 in the morning and it freaks them out. So you can't bypass that by doing that. You can't turn freeze protect mode off on a few systems. I know Hayward allows you to do that on the Aqualogic, but in most cases it's there just to protect the pump from freezing. A lot of standalone VS pumps, you can also disable the freeze protect mode. So if you're in an area where you're not going to actually get freezing weather and you don't want the pump to turn on, you can actually disable it. It's not recommended by the manufacturer, and I wouldn't disable it in areas where you get really freezing weather, like parts of Texas, maybe parts of other parts of different states where it gets really cold, or up north in California. You definitely don't want to disable it in those areas. This may sound like a no-brainer or a duh kind of statement, but with the really cold weather, the water temperature, of course, drops in the pool. So it's really cold water. And if you have a customer that has a spa and they want to heat it up, and if the water temperature is like 50 degrees or maybe even less than that, it's going to take quite a long time for even a 400,000, 400 BTU heater to heat up that water. So I get these calls all the time where the customer, it's the middle of winter, it's January, the water temperature's at 50 degrees, maybe 48. So I'm not surprised when I get these phone calls from the customers that, hey, I had my hot tub on for an hour and it just feels like it's in the 80s. It's just not getting up to 100. It does take a long time when the water is that cold to heat up. And don't be surprised if it takes 2 or 3 times as long to heat up your spa than it would normally take if the water temperature was what would be in the summertime in the 70s. To get it from 70 to 100 takes about 30 minutes or 40 minutes in most cases. So, if it's in the 40s, you're going to have to double that or triple that in some cases. Now, if you want to heat your pool up for a party in January and the water temperature is at 50, it's going to take quite a long time to heat it up to 85 degrees. I would say probably a couple of days in some cases with a gas heater. So don't be surprised if it takes a while to heat up your pool in the winter. You may want to get a solar blanket to cover it so that it retains the heat at nighttime as it's heating up. But you'll have to run your pool, 24/7 to heat it up in the winter. And there's been a few customers that have done that for a party. I don't recommend it because your gas bill is going to be pretty tremendous. But besides that, the cold water, it does take longer to heat up. So that's something to be aware of. If you're having a party and you want to use your hot tub, turn that thing on several hours early so that you have a good window and it's going to be nice and hot by the time you want to use it in the wintertime. Some good things about the cold weather is that the chlorine in the pool holds really well in cold water. Algae is not going to grow in the pool. I think the temperature, if it drops below 60, you're not going to have any algae in the pool growing in that water. And the chlorine holds for a very long time. So if your water temperature is in the 60s and you have, let's say you have a 15,000 gallon pool, if you were to pour a gallon of 12.5% liquid chlorine in there, it may last 3 weeks in there without you having to add more chlorine to that pool. If the water is even cooler, the chlorine will even hold even better because really there's nothing that's going to destroy the chlorine in the water. The water temperature is cold, so you're not going to have algae. The UV index is really low in the wintertime. And you don't have that much sunlight to begin with, but then you have a really low UV index. So all this leads to the fact that the chlorine lasts longer in the pool. Now, can you run your pool less because of this reason? I think if you're not using your pool, you can definitely drop the time down. I have 2 different time sets on my variable speed pump, one for the summer and one for the winter. And I think in the wintertime it's perfectly acceptable to drop your runtime down, maybe drop the RPM speed down a little bit to save some money on your electricity bill because the water doesn't really need to be circulating that much anyway. No one's using the pool. And one of the reasons why you circulate the water, not just for water quality, but you circulate it for safety because you want to have safe water. You want to make sure the water cycles through the filter that the chlorine is treating any kind of bacteria and viruses in the pool. But if no one's using it, there's no need to run it that long. And so you can dial it back to something reasonable. Don't go like crazy and go down to like 1 or 2 hours. It does need to circulate, but you can cut that time in half in a lot of cases. So if you're running it, 20 hours in the summer with one speed at 1800 RPMs for 12 hours, and then 8 hours at 2600 RPMs, maybe cut the 1800 RPMs down to 6 hours and cut the high speed down to 4 hours. And that way you save some money there in the wintertime, and the pool should be perfectly fine with that lower run time. Just make sure you bump it up right when the weather starts to warm up to avoid any kind of water quality issues with the shorter run time when the water's warmer. And in colder water, you may think that you don't need to add muriatic acid because the water is cold, where in fact, depending on the calcium hardness of the water and the water temperature, let's say the temperature is in the 50s and your calcium hardness is 400, and if you keep the pH at 8 or 8.2 with the alkalinity within normal range of 100, you're going to definitely have scale forming water. So you may want to lower the pH down to 7.6 or 7.8 to prevent that. You can refer to the Orenda LSI app to get a more accurate grasp of that. But definitely you can't go the whole winter without adding acid to the pool because pH is a factor even in cold water. So definitely keep an eye on that and don't let the pH get too high in the pool, especially if the calcium hardness is higher in your area. And you can learn more about the LSI on my website if you go to swimmingpoollearning.com. Scroll down to the center of the homepage and you'll see a link to Orenda. Click on that, and on the Orenda site, you're going to have an LSI calculator. And note the temperature of your pool water, and you can play around with that, and you can see, and every area is different based on the calcium hardness of the water in your area. But of course, refer to that so you know you're not going to have scale forming in the winter. I do a lot of treating of scale in the wintertime in my pool route. So if I notice the pool has some scale, I'll do the treatment in the winter time for that, because for some reason in the cold water, it seems like the scale lifts off easier than in the hot water. Maybe it's just my imagination, or maybe I have more time in the winter to deal with it. But if I'm doing any kind of scale treatment, I'll use the Easy Care Butec or Scale Tech. Again, that's the Easy Care Butec or Scale Tech. And the main difference between these two chemicals is that the Scale Tech only is effective when the chlorine level is near zero, which is perfectly fine in the wintertime. You don't need a lot of chlorine in the pool anyway, so the Scale Tech is really effective. And this lifts a lot of scale off of the pool surface itself. I wouldn't say it does a superb job on the water line. You can raise the water and try it to get the white scale off of there, but typically that's not going to be removed as much as if you feel a little bit of scale on the pool itself. If you have a plaster pool or pebble tech pool, it's a good time to do the treatment with the Scale Tech or the Butec in the wintertime and get some of that scale lifted off the pool. And you may notice that your pH is going up higher in the wintertime than in the summer, is that you're not using the 3-inch trichlor tablets nearly as much in the wintertime, if at all. And the trichlor tablets have acid in them, which lowers the pH of the pool. So once you stop using the trichlor tablets and switch over to liquid chlorine, you may notice the pH rising in the pool when it wasn't before. And that's because the trichlor tablets were helping to keep that pH down in the pool. And this will lead, of course, to more acid use to lower the pH down because you're not using the tablets. And the tablets, again, have a very low pH that helps keep the pool kind of balanced in the summertime as they dissolve in the water. And this, of course, lowers the pH down when the tablets are dissolving. And if you have a pool with a saltwater generator, note that most saltwater generators stop working when the water temperature is in the 60-degree area. I think low 60s, mid 60s, most saltwater generators just aren't going to work. And there may be an indicator light on the saltwater system that says cold or not generating cold water, something like that. So just switch over to liquid chlorine or cal hypo in the wintertime. And you don't need that much chemicals, that much chlorine, I should say, in a pool with really cold water anyway. So it's not a deal breaker with a saltwater generator. Besides that, if it was working in the wintertime, you'd have to dial that thing down to a very low output because of the fact you don't need a lot of chlorine in the cold water. So the fact that it just turns off in the winter is not a big deal. Just note that it is going to turn off in the wintertime when the water temperature gets into the 60s. And therefore, you have to switch over to a liquid chlorine or a cal hypo to maintain some sanitizer in that pool. And one last note, as far as winter time goes, you're probably going to have an increase in leaf debris in the pool. So I definitely would recommend having a vacuum system of some kind. The Riptide, the bottom feeder, something like that would be great to have in the wintertime because the leaf debris tends to increase in the wintertime. And it's one of the things that you have to be aware of when you do pool service. If you're doing pools in the summer, everything looks really great. That same pool in the winter may really be a huge burden for you with all the debris that falls in there in the wintertime. The rain washes a lot of stuff in there, the wind, of course. And in my area, we hardly get any rain anymore. So we might get 4 inches of rain a year. So to me, the rain is not a big deal. The wind is more of a big factor in my area. It gets really windy in the wintertime here, and the wind creates a lot of mess, especially debris. So just be aware of the fact that in the wintertime, most pools get more debris than they get in the summertime, with a few exceptions. So the debris load increases, so you'll be doing more manual labor in a lot of cases in the wintertime than you are doing in the summertime. I think sometimes those of you on the East Coast are kind of fortunate that you can close the pools in the wintertime and not have to work 48 weeks out of the year maintaining the pool. So in a way, you're kind of fortunate over us West Coast and all those states over on the East Bottom, like Florida, that stay open. I guess Florida is the only state on the bottom, on the East Coast, I should say, if I look at the map and know my geography. But on the West Coast here, we keep our pools open all year round, in most parts of Texas also. If you're looking for other podcasts that I recorded, you could find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on that podcast icon, and that'll take you to a drop-down menu of other podcasts I recorded. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.